It's a mustache.
It's a microphone.
Oh, it's the wind thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
That good right there?
You have the Hero 3 you can see on your phone.
Oh, yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, I need to get one of those.
Yeah, I might.
What else is new?
At least the accessories are backwards compatible.
Mm-hmm. But I did a bunch of GoPro shot on this trip I was on.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. These
And
guys
I couldn't find
control,
the correct mount, so I used the chesty. You know, I have the one off the chesty, and it was loose in the thing, so all the sounds like.
Yeah.
Then you may have to grab
And then the
some
view
cover
sometimes
out.
is off.
Front row seats.
Yeah.
How about this one? You got any seats?
No.
I'm guessing, maybe everybody in here knows you've done these already, and that's probably why you're here. But, so, if there's a man who needs no introduction, really, and I'm really excited to have you here. So thank you for coming. Hey, guys. Hi. So, without further ado, please welcome Don Emde, the other.
Thanks for having me. My book is called A Book Signing. This is a 2003 edition, which was actually the second edition of the book on the history of the Daytona 200. So we did the first one in 1990. So I haven't actually done in the last couple of years a book signing. So it's nice to be able to come back and talk about Daytona and how that all came down. And then Jessica's all set up today. When we leave, if you want to pick up a copy, and I'll sign that for you. But all of you that will be here today, I'll sign you a copy of the print that we made. And just so you know, my dad didn't actually sign that. He passed away in 1994. So what I did is we made a scan of that and everything that's scanned in already, and then I'll sign it myself too. So, but yeah, but thanks for coming out and hearing my story. I think I did win the Daytona 200 in 1972, and my father won the race in 1948, and we're the only father and son to have both won that race. And we're very proud of that. And Daytona has really been pretty much a part of my life since I can remember. It was his history and all the things that he had accomplished. But I think before I get into actually what it was like to win the Daytona 200, I think if I started telling the story now, I'd probably say a whole bunch of things that wouldn't make any sense to you, because if you watch it on TV now, the Daytona 200, it's real different now than what it used to be. So I think things have really changed a lot through the years. And just a quick little primer about Daytona 200 and how we kind of got to the point of when I rode, and then even where it went from there. Daytona, a lot of you may not know, before they used to do speed records at Bonneville, they used to do them in Florida. Actually, Ormond Beach, which is the next town north. If you ever go there during Bike Week, you'll see some signs. They call that the birthplace of speed. And they used to run right after into the 1900s, cars and motorcycles from Ormond Beach south down to about the Main Street Pier in Daytona. So that's really where a lot of the early records were. Malcolm Campbell did this Bluebird and different things had run there. I think that they had speeds of over 300 miles an hour in that little narrow stretch of beach through the years. And then in 1937, they had been having this 200-mile road race. Started in Savannah, Georgia, had made its way down to Jacksonville, and a group of promoters, they were actually a motorcycle dealer association in 1937, brought the race to Daytona Beach, and they used that little section of the sand, and then went up onto A1A. If you've been to Daytona, that's the highway right along the coast, not really, it's a 4-lane road. And then back, they made about a 3-mile course right up there near Main Street. And they ran the first number of races there until World War II broke out, and then there was no race from 1942 through 1946. And then in 1947, the war is over, things are coming back, and Bill France, who you all heard the name, who built the Speedway and NASCAR and all that, he was just getting into race promotion, so he took over the race at that point. And one thing he realized is that part of the beach he was in, people could come from all over. It was difficult to be able to charge tickets because everybody could come and sneak in. So he moved the track to the very far end of the peninsula, and if you that go to Daytona, there's actually a restaurant to this day. It's called the North Turn Restaurant, and then it goes from there south to the into the point. So now he had a landlocked area that, you know, there's one gate you could get in and go down and watch the races. And NASCAR took off at the same time. The motorcycling ran, and they had a race in 1947. In 1948, my father was in that race, and it was a new Indian production racer that they had built. It was kind of really their last hurrah. It was called a model 648 Big Base Scout, and they made 50 of them for that. The dealers could buy, and an Indian dealer sponsored my dad on one, and a little bit of, I guess you'd say, good karma that came out of the whole thing. They used to the way the licensing used to run in motorcycling is if you were a novice rider, you got a pro license. Your first year was you were a novice, and you had to score so many points. The very next year you became an amateur, and then the next year after you scored enough points you became an expert. Well, in those years, if you had an AMA Pro Expert card and you entered the Daytona 200, you were in the race. There was no qualifying, and they take some, and some of them you go home. Everybody was in the race, and that year, 1948, was the largest number of riders that were ever in the race. It was over 160, and see if you can imagine. And so they didn't they didn't start them all at once. They kind of did it kind of like the Isle of Man, where they went off in waves. In this case, they actually did it 10 riders to a row, and then but they did actually credit everybody like they do at the Isle of Man for the elapsed time. And so out of the 160 riders, my dad drew number 5, and so that meant he was in the middle of the front row. And even though the people did get credit for the other time of off the start, clearly having a nice smooth track and everything ahead of him was really sent him on his way, and I think just really got him pumped up well. And he was a top rider, had already won some national championship dirt track races, and had the combination. And he was first off the line, and he was just kind of gone, and had built up a lead of over a minute at about the halfway point, and kind of cruised in. And a rider on a Norton from Canada gave a good chase and ended up about 12 seconds behind at the line. So that was a big day for him, and he had a great career in motorcycling, and parlayed that actually into the motorcycle business that they were in, him and my mom, for about the next 40 years. After the 40s, the British brands, even though there was the one Norton that was going, that came down from Canada, and that actually had connections to the Norton factory in England, Norton Manx's and all that. But then BSAs and Triumphs and things were starting to come into the U.S., and Harley Davidson also developed their new KR flathead bike, and so they had some great battles in the 50s on this beach course at Daytona, 4-mile track, and Harley Davidson's won the majority of them. There was one good year for BSA in 1954 where they had the first 4 places. Other than that, it was pretty much a Harley Davidson show from there. And that went through 1960, and by then Bill France already had built a new Daytona International Speedway. And so the big change, of course, was then going from the beach over to the road course in Daytona. And it's funny, the first couple of years there, they were so afraid of the speeds that motorcycles would obtain going around the banking that they didn't even use the banking. The first 2 years there, the track was a totally flat infield course, and they went right by the start-finish line. It was about the most banking they got out of it, but then right into the infield and around. And they did that for about 2 years, so they finally realized that it's probably going to work out, and they created a bigger track. And it was now the 3.81-mile road course, very similar to today, but it's had a few adjustments and modifications through the years, through some of the changes they made at the Speedway. So the 60s, the AMA had an interesting rule. Some say it was a lot to do with trying to protect the American motorcycle industry. Indian was now gone, but Harley Davidson was there. So they had a rule where a 750cc flathead could run, but the British bikes were the vertical twins that had overhead valves, could only run a 500cc twin or single. And so you had BSA Gold Stars and Triumph twins primarily running against Harley Davidson KRs, and that was the format through the 60s. And the days of Gary Nixon and Roger Riemann and a lot of legendary names that starting to emerge through the sport. And then in 1969, the AMA got an affiliation with the FIM, the whole world sanctioning body, and they came down and they knew that there was some new machinery that was coming, and that how to figure out any kind of a real format of valve structures and all that just wasn't going to work. And so they actually changed the rule in 1969 where the limit was just 750 cc's, and the smallest bike you could have in the field was 350 cc's. And the whole rule was that there just had to be 200 of that particular bike brought into the country, either as a street bike, but if there was then a race kit, there had to be 200 of the race kits available, or as a full race bike. And so in 1969, there wasn't a lot of changes that were noticeable, but by 1970, you now had Honda 750s and BSA and Triumph triples. In the Honda 754, you still had the Harleys, but you had Suzuki 500 twin, 2 strokes, Yamaha 350, 2 strokes, and a real array of different bikes were on the track now. And for 1970, Dick Mann won that race on a Honda 4. The next year was a very big year for the BSA Triumph company. I actually was my first year in the expert division and was made their team. I rode a BSA triple that year, and Dick Mann moved over also to the BSA team, and so he won the race, and I was able to get third in my first time in the 200 on the BSA. And the thing was really becoming very international now. That the BSA company brought Mike Hillwood, the former world champion. He rode with us on BSAs, and it was really becoming kind of a real international event. And I went through that season riding for BSA. Unfortunately, they had some big problems financially. They were within a couple of years of going out of business, and the team was cut back the next year. So late in the year, I was informed that myself and also people like Gary Nixon and David Aldana and Jim Rice, we were all fired. Only 2 riders remained on the team, Dick Mann and Gene Romero. And so I had to go scrambling to find a ride, and a guy that I had ridden club racing for as I was getting my road racing career going in the 70s. His name was Mel Dennison. He was a Yamaha dealer in Bakersfield, California, and had good connections with Yamaha. And I reconnected with him, and he put together a bike. I mean, it wasn't really put together. It was a new production 6-speed Yamaha TR3 for there. But that was the field by then was really amazing. Suzuki had now changed their now come in with a 750 2-stroke, a 3-cylinder. Kawasaki had the H2R instead of a 500. They now had a 750, a 2-stroke. There were still Honda 750s. Norton's, there were some. They were called the John Player Specials from England, and that whole team had arrived, and about 50 Yamahas just like mine. And so that brings us to the 72 race, and it was again very international. A lot of riders from overseas, a lot of riders from America. Some of them were flat trackers, some of them were road race specialists, but it was a real neat variety of riders that were there. About 62,000 people, I think, were there. I mean, which is a big change from what we see, unfortunately, today, where the race doesn't draw near that many people. So to kind of take it around to my victory in the race, I having finished third the year before, I knew that I could ride with all the riders that were there, as long as we had the horsepower to keep up with all these bikes. But the Suzuki and Kawasaki, the new H2R and the Suzuki triple TR 750, just had tremendous horsepower and speed. And around the banks, I was probably down maybe over 10 miles an hour to their top speed, which at Daytona around the banking itself is about 2 seconds a lap, just losing to them just by sitting there just trying to go around the oval. And by the way, those years, there was no chicane. If you watch the Daytona races now, you'll see where they go down the back straightaway, and there's a chicane they go into, and then back up onto the banking. That all had to do with all the tire issues that were starting to develop in those years. But in 1972, through that race, we left the infield, went around the first banking, down the back straightaway, and straight up onto the next banking, and all the way around to the infield to go into turn 1. So there was a real variety of bikes, and actually quite a variety of speed. There was a lot of the bikes that were kind of the best of the best from 1971 would run about 162 or 3 or 4 miles an hour, which around Daytona was all pretty good. So we had kind of a pack of that. But these Suzukis and Kawasaki's would run about 175, and so they were just kind of in a league of their own. But when I got to Daytona, it's funny. When I put this ride together with Mel Dennison, I had felt actually very comfortable and very, you know, like there was nothing mentally in my way of why I wouldn't win that race. I was third last year. I was just, you know, kind of on in a little zone in my game of racing. I was very comfortable with that, and I actually went to Daytona very confident that I was gonna win the race. And so we get to Daytona, and then the very first practice session, I'm out, and you know, kind of going out on the session, and one of these Suzuki's or Kawasaki just kind of goes by. You know, you're just kind of sitting there, all, you know, all you can kind of do are going around the banking, and this bike is just continually just moving away. By the time I get to the infield, I'm 2 seconds behind this guy, and it was somebody like, you know, Yvonne Duhamel or one of the top, you know, the other top riders. So it's not like you're going to gain a lot on them on the infield if you gain any at all. And so really, they were just kind of real quickly on their own, and so I was my little confidence in, you know, that I was going to win this race. I tried to think, how's this going to work out? But late in that very first afternoon, we started hearing little rumblings about the tires. The problem they had in those years, these days, if you follow all the road racing really close, you know, each year around December, Dunlop and Tire Company will take a lot of the teams to Daytona, and they can do some testing, and they kind of know what's coming and develop that all out. None of that happened in those years. There wasn't any. The only testing that they did was Suzuki and Honda and Kawasaki, in Japan would run at I think the Suzuka course, and they would do some of the testing over there, so they could get the bike figured out. But nothing had the whole issue of G-force and the banking and the things where they could find out what the bike was going to be like on the going around the track there. So, hello, Robert. See, how you doing? So you'll have to jump in the middle of the story here, but telling my story about the Daytona 200. So 1972. So we're in the getting the bike week going, and another thing that's very different about bike week now is the reason they used to call it bike week. We used to show up at Daytona on the previous Sunday to the 200, and on Monday morning you would go in, and that's the day that you would actually go in and get you get your credentials going, get your pit all set up, everything. There would be an afternoon practice on Monday, a whole other day of practice on Tuesday, and then they used to have a kind of a amateur day on Wednesday, and then Thursday was the day there was a morning practice and an afternoon qualifying. Friday they would have a race for I think the junior riders and the novice riders. Saturday we'd have a 100-mile race for the 250 riders, and I rode in that race a number of times, including 72. And then on Sunday would be the big Daytona 200. So it truly was a full bike week. Nowadays, I think they show up on, I think they get in on Thursday. Actually, that afternoon they're starting to run some races. Friday, a few more, and then the finale goes off on Saturday, and they're out of there. So it's not quite a bike week that they do any longer, but it still is the Daytona 200. So anyway, back to my story. Late in that afternoon, on that Monday afternoon, while I'm just spinning my head about the speed that these Suzukis and Kawasaki's had, the word is coming back is that, man, those guys are going like 4 laps, and they're burning off the rear tires, and you know, and so they were now coming in. They're trying all kind of air pressures and different things, and I forget exactly what Kawasaki was on. If they were, I think they might have been on Dunlops, but the Suzukis were on Dunlops for sure, and they were just having some major issues, and I think they stayed on. Dunlop went back and tried to do some other things for them on Tuesday, and then they finally came back to the decision. They said, you can't run these. We can't let you run these things. They won't go near the distance, and if one of them comes apart, it'll be a very bad deal. So they were out. At that point, Goodyear was kind of keeping an eye on what was going on, and they actually were able to put the word back up to Akron, Ohio. Got to get something. They shipped some things in, and they actually then they shipped it over to Goodyear's for the tire for the 200, and they thought that they were going to be good to go. But even some of the people I had talked to said there's really no way those guys are going to run 200 miles, and so. You know, my confidence was growing. I was just telling him I arrived at Daytona very confident that I was going to win this race, and I was doing fine. You know, there was other riders. Actually, Kenny Roberts was in that race, but that was his very first race. He was a great rider, but he wasn't quite the rider he would become in the years to pass. But there was, the years to come. But there was a rider named Kel Carruthers who was kind of mentored him, and a number of others. And so, you know, all the Yamahas and Nortons and Triumphs and BSAs and stuff like that. I was very competitive with those guys, and so my confidence was coming back, and things were kind of getting all set to go for the 200. But as I mentioned, they used to run a 250 race, and why did we ride that race too? A lot of it in those years, there wasn't like a lot of big contracts. We just kind of raced for money, and that was a time when you raced. Dirt tracking was the same part of the series as was road racing. That's what like Dick Mann, Gary Nixon, these guys, when they won their championship, they were #1 rider. They had done, they'd run half-mile tracks, TT dirt tracks, road racing. It was a very intense time. Somebody earlier, I think you were mentioning just seeing it On Any Sunday. If you see the movie On Any Sunday, I mean that's kind of, if you go through and you can piece together a little bit. There's some other races that weren't part of our series, like the 6-day trials in Bonneville and all that, but the flat tracking and the road race and all that was all to do with just one point system that we had. So, but also that's how we made our living. I mean, you had to run in a lot of races, and you were kind of racing for cash. So if there was a race, we raced it. That's kind of what it kind of came down to. It was really a lot of it was cash, and in the big championship race, of course, you're getting points and trying to hopefully win the title. But really, more than anything, you just had to. That's how I made my living for running things. And during the summer, I'd be racing a flat track thing on a Thursday night on the way to maybe go to somewhere like Talladega or something like that to road race that weekend and what have you. But so they had this 250 race. It was a 100-mile race, and it was very intense. It would almost be kind of like watching the Moto 2 in MotoGP series right now or something like that. Very intense, and everybody kind of had almost the same bike. It was about 90% of them were Yamaha 250 twins. There was the occasional Kawasaki and a few other bikes, but it was mostly the Yamaha, just like we all had. So we're kind of almost on all the same bikes. It was a very intense race, and so I take off in the race, and I got into a lead pack with there was a rider named Dave Smith from used to live in Lakewood over here. He's passed away now, but Kenny Roberts, a rider named Gary Fisher. I mentioned Kel Carruthers. Anyway, so a number of us were all in this kind of lead pack, and it had taken off, and things were kind of settling down. We'd run about 7 or 8 laps, and I went into to turn 1, and it's funny now is this big knee down, elbow down, air and everything. In those years, the bigger problem we had very narrow tires, and they really hadn't got things all kind of worked out, and so the as far as how much kind of lean angle you could really put on the bike. And I was going in, I think it was Kenny and some of them were right there. And I just went into turn 1, and it was just, the big hairpin. And I'd leaned it over just a little bit too far, ground out the exhaust pipe, lifted the rear wheel, and kind of sent me kind of like the reverse of what Danny Pedrosa did, if you watched the motor thing just this last weekend. But it just kind of went sideways, threw me off right onto my shoulder, and on my right shoulder. And I was down, and I got up, and I was pretty sure I thought I had broken my shoulder, and so the race continued, and they took me off in the ambulance and back to the infield, and eventually over to the Halifax hospital, and so they were X-raying me and everything, and they came back and said, no, it's not broken, but it was just really sore, but I was still really feeling like I was going to win this race, and don't ask me how cosmic this all would be, but it was just something that kept driving me, the fact that I was going to win this race. And so I had my parents were with me, and we were staying out by the beach, and my mom said, oh yeah, we have to get you back to the hotel and you can lay down. I said, let's go by the track, and I wanted to convince Mel, my tuner, that I'll be here Sunday, just have the thing ready, and I'll be ready to ride. And I then went back to the hotel, and then soaking it and having all kind of ice packs and different things and hot packs that went back and forth to try to keep everything basically kind of limber, and it was very sore. And when I woke up the next morning, what I found was I really couldn't lift it much this way, but I could kind of go this way. And unfortunately, at least for road racing, you didn't have to move your arm out too much. But and then I had to go to the infield hospital that morning, because if you are taken to the hospital, the AMA rules, I'm sure it's probably the same, your license gets pulled, and you have to go back and have it kind of get checked out to be able to run in the race. So I had to go to the infield hospital and have a doctor check it out. And he was moving all around, and I just was kind of gritting my teeth, but I convinced him that I could ride, and so I was cleared to run the race. So now we're all good to go, and this is the only race that runs on Sunday now is the Daytona 200, and we line up and go. And another thing that they did then that they don't do any longer. Well, a couple things actually. They didn't start them in waves. Nowadays they have been on the side of the field. They'll actually start a wave of riders, and then they wait a few seconds and another wave goes. They don't credit these guys back for that lost time, whatever. But they just this is how it goes. In those years, I think by now, I mentioned my dad's race was 160 entries when he rode. But by the time we got over the speedway, I think the race had about 80 or so riders were in the field, and but we all took off at once. And the other difference is that instead of just going right into the infield, we did one kind of NASCAR lap. So we went off out of the pits like NASCAR does, right onto the banking, all the way around 2.5 miles, and then into the infield, and then it all started from there. So, so the race takes off, and I was in about 10th place. We went around the banking, and sure enough, from the thing we'd done the day before, even on the banking, I can remember kind of coming around and seeing with a kind of pack of guys, and there was about 4 or 5 of these bikes just pulling away, and it was like we're not in the race with those guys, but they're just going to go do their thing, and they were just moving ahead, and so I went out a couple of laps, and so again the kind of things starting to settle down a little bit, and in fact, back the same 2 guys I was racing with the day before, Kenny Roberts and Dave Smith, I was kind of with them and a couple of other riders and some, like Yamahas and whatever, and so we were kind of making our way and just sort of, and I think we were probably, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, somewhere right in that area. And the next lap, I was coming around, I don't know, 7 or 8 laps out, and I was going down the back straightaway, and the tachometers kind of started doing a little bit of looking kind of funny, and as I was getting onto the banking, it's like all of a sudden it's starting to dive, and it's like the bike is seizing, and in a normal place, if you were in a short course, you would just clutch it immediately, because otherwise it would just throw you on the ground. But on the banking in Daytona at 160 some miles an hour, there was still enough power that was going through that it was. I mean, I guess it could have just sort of kind of exploded, but it was really struggling, and I had the biggest battle in my mind that I ever had in my life, because I still had this. I'm going to win the race, but I'm coming around and I'm just about able to see the entrance to the pits, and the natural thing to do was to get out of the way and bring it into the pits, and so I kind of got down and got a little foot out and everything, got kind of down a little bit, and I clutched it, and now bikes are starting to kind of move by me, and I just had this moment where I just said to myself, if you go in, you're not going to win. And I knew that I would coast up there and the bike, the whole day would be over, and I got thinking, well, what's it going to hurt if I try to see if I can get it to run again? And so I basically kind of pointed it straight up, and I went past the pit entrance down on the apron, and again there's some bikes that are kind of starting to kind of move by me now, and I let the clutch out, and the thing kind of did a thing, and it just but next thing I knew, it actually coughed and sput, and it cleared up, and so I started downshifting and getting it into the gear and took off again, and it actually ran fine, and it was everything was fine, and most people never believed that it could actually have happened, but rather than an actual piston seizure, what actually had happened, and again, I think the only place it could ever have been done is because of the power going down the straightaway, is actually the circlip on one of the pistons had actually come out, and it was actually, and later they had the piston in, and there was this whole thing where it had augured its way up along the cylinder wall, and then when I let the thing out, it actually coughed it out the exhaust pipe, and then it actually run, and it collapsed one of the rings. But at Daytona, you're geared so high anyway that the bikes didn't really have a lot of acceleration. You had to slip the clutch out or turn one and all these things anyway. So it's just kind of how it was, and actually the bike ran the right. We didn't know that, of course, until after he tore it down. But it had done this little seizure, and then after that, it was running fine. So. But by now I must have lost 20 or 30 places. I mean, because it was so early in the race, the bikes were still, were kind of passing by. But I started making my way along, And if you know Grand Prix history, you might know the world champion Phil Reed. He had run, I don't know how many world titles, but he was a factory Yamaha rider. And then later on MV Augustas and into the 70s. And Phil was part of the John Player Norton team. And I'm not sure I've ever even asked him why he got such a bad start, but he was way back in that area. And I kind of caught up with him, and we started running. And we were fairly quickly starting to pass guys, and so we were just kind of running together and moving our way up. And fairly soon, the Suzukis and Kawasaki's are all out of the race. Probably by 50 miles, all except one of them had either had some other engine problem or tires and all the other things. So those guys, as everybody had predicted, were all out of the race except for one. It was a rider named Jody Nicholas, who lives in this area, and he was on a factory Suzuki, and he was still continuing on and kind of off by himself. And so we're moving along, and by now Phil and I think we're up in the top 10. 9, 8, 7, and different guys. There's guys were crashing out, and it was a real wild time from about 50 miles to the 100-mile mark. Of just a lot of things were happening, and pretty soon on the big Daytona board, they would show the first 5 places. And at some point, somewhere out about 75 miles or so, Phil and I are in number 25, and his number anyway are up on the 22. I think he was running, are showing up on the board. So we're in the top 5, and Kenny Roberts was out. I think he had a flat tire. Different ones, and actually Dave Smith, who won the race. I don't know if I said that earlier. The 250 race the day before was moving up towards the lead. Gary Fisher was on a Honda 4, was up near the lead, and Jody I think was leading at that point. And we got very close to the 100-mile mark, and it's kind of funny. To this day, I see Phil Reed about maybe once a year, once every 2 years. Every time I see him, his eyes roll back, and this haunts him forever, I think, is that he had this John Player Norton team. So my bike, to do the gas stop, my dad had actually fabricated out. He started with a trash can, and he actually made then a little handheld, dump can that would go on the top of the thing. So all I had to do was come in and just pop the top, and they would do the 6 gallons and in and out. And so now it came time for the gas stops, and we came in, and my dad put the thing in the gas up, and I was in and out in 9 seconds. So we did 6 gallons in 9 seconds, and I'm gone. Well, Phil had this full Grand Prix Formula One style, the big tower in the back and all the thing, kind of like you'd even use today, with the big hoses, and would go right in the side. And the pit guy of his didn't catch one of the teeth quite right, and it was still kind of open, and they hit the thing, and the gas went everywhere. And so anyway, he was, I think the motor died, and he was in for about 45 seconds. And so anyway, so I didn't see him the rest of the day, but anyway, so that kind of messed up his day. And again, to this day, it haunts him. But so I left the pits and got out, and then by about this time, then Jody Nicholas, who had been leading, finally his tire went out at 100 miles. And amazing, by now maybe if you've wondered, well, wouldn't you come in and just get a new tire? Nobody in those years was thinking of any kind of tire stops. There was no, it was axles, the chain over a sprocket, and at that point nobody really we thought that you could possibly have a chance of doing good at all in Daytona if you try to do a tire. So anyway, so he was out of the race as well. So Jody is now out, Phil is kind of gone, and Dave Smith actually, he kind of messed up. His gas stop didn't go as well as mine either, so he actually at one point was leading, and I got back ahead of him in the exchange of the pit stop. So now I was up near the front, and the only rider that was really kind of with me was a fellow named Ray Hempstead, who's a Yamaha dealer to this day in Florida, and so Ray and I came out, and so our bikes were kind of identical. He was riding great. I was trying, keeping going, and so we started this battle in the second 100 miles to go, and moving along, and we were just. He'd lead for a few laps, and I'd lead for a few laps, but he finally got to a point where he was had put just a little bit of a gap on me, and things were kind of settling down where I was just sort of staying back. I was probably I don't know, maybe 10 bike lengths or so, and I just couldn't quite catch him. And I mentioned earlier that I had raced for the BSA factory the year before, and was part of that with David Aldana and Jim Rice and Dick Mann and myself. We were the BSA factory team. And then 71, at the end of the year, they had to let us all go except Dick. And so Dick is still out there on this PSA. And probably at about 100 and 185 miles, 190 miles, so not too many more laps to go. Dick had been in and out of the pits all day long with problems with his BSA. It would run good when it was running, but then it would kind of start sputtering and he would come in. I think it was some kind of ignition problem. And Dick came out of the pits one of the laps as we came in, and so Ray was kind of like about where he was, and I think I got by him. And as we came up and we went through the infield, as we got onto the banking, I got into the Dick's draft, and his BSA was actually running great. And as we went around the banking, I was drafting him, and he actually pulled me past Ray. We just drafted right by him, and you know, and it really saved the day for me. And so now I was in the lead. And the only last little scare that we kind of had that had to do with why they would later change the starting procedure was late in the race. There was a Suzuki 500 by a New Zealand rider named Jeff Perry, and Jeff actually came up and caught us and was kind of in the mix with Ray and I for a while, and then he actually got by both of us when all that was even happening and was motoring along. And at one point it looked like Jeff was going to take the win, and with about 2 laps to go, his chain broke and he was out of the race. And from there, but what they then found out about a month later was they went back to the scoring. They realized that he actually was a lap down, was unlapping himself, and but the scorers and stuff had thought he was actually in the lead. So I actually got credit for about 10 more laps of leading than I thought I did. But anyways, from there I was able to lead Ray across the line and won the race. And it was kind of quite an amazing accomplishment. I was definitely worn out from all the things I'd gone through of the highs and lows of thinking I'm going to win, to maybe I'm not going to win, and all the things I had to do. But it was a great day. It was the first time, and still to this day is the only time that a father and his son have won the Daytona 200, and we're very proud of that. And you know, and it's been something that from age, fortunately, you know, it's kind of stayed with me. I've got a book, all the things that we've done, and it's kind of an iconic part of my life, and has stayed that way. I think I did mention, Jessica, I think you mentioned in the promotion, the thing what I had told you was one of the other things that kind of makes it very unique about winning the Daytona 200. And I'm originally from San Diego, and it was funny growing up in San Diego. My father, well, actually, one of his best friends and kind of mentors is named Ed Kretz, and he was originally from the San Diego area, later moved up to LA, but Ed was the winner of the first Daytona 200. My father then had won the race. Later in the 50s, a rider named Brad Andres, they were him and his dad, they were the owners of the San Diego Harley-Davidson Company. Brad won the Daytona 200 3 times. A rider named Joe Leonard, who went on to do great things in motorcycles and cars, was originally from San Diego and had won the race twice himself. A rider named Ralph White had won the race in 1963, and then a rider named Cal Rayburn, who was a good friend of mine, won the race in 1968 and 69. So I always joke to people, there was one of the things that to be anybody in San Diego, you just had to be able, you know, say you had won the Daytona 200. So at least it kind of got me off the hook with that as well. But we're proud of that. But just to move forward and kind of wrap things up. So my career, actually, I rode Daytona one more time in 1973. I came back and rode. I got a ride with the Suzuki factory, and actually I was so convinced, having seen what had happened with the speeds of the Suzuki's and Kawasaki's had, that I just figured they're bound to figure this tire problem out. But if when they do, a person's going to need to be on one of those bikes. And so I left the Yamaha ride that I had, and I got a ride for Daytona on the Suzuki, and I got 7th the next year, and turned out Yamaha 350s were 1, 2, 3, just like the bike I'd ridden the year before. But so that was some good years for the little bike. That was again in a class where you could run a 350 all the way to a 750, and so the year I won, the second place rider Ray Hempstead and Dave Smith, we were all on 350 Yamahas against the 750s, and the next year Jarno Saarinen and 2 other riders were 1, 2, 3 again against the 750s, and so it was a great accomplishment for Yamaha. But the whole power to weight ratio, gas mileage, reliability, lightweight, it was Yamaha was the right bike to have for those 2 years. And then in 1974, Yamaha comes out with the 700, which was basically taking 2 of the 350 engines and mating them side by side, and you now had an inline 4-cylinder 700. And Giacomo Agostini won the race on that. The next year they upped it to a full 750, and Yamahas, and there was people like Barry Sheen came over. with Suzuki's, and there was others who gave it a shot with Kawasaki's and other brands, but Yamaha really dominated. And my win in 1972 was the first of 13 years that Yamaha won the race until the race got to the mid 80s, and by then I think the people at Daytona, you know, it's funny, you could kind of look at hindsight, they were getting 80,000 people were showing up there to watch Kenny Roberts and Barry Sheen and, you know, all the, you know, Giacomo Agostini, all the Steve Baker, many international riders. They were coming from, you know, this Patrick Pons from France, and different riders were coming from all over the world and competing, and it was fantastic. But the people at Daytona thought, well, we need to mix it up a little bit, and, you know, NASCAR was starting to go pretty well, so they wanted to adopt the NASCAR formula for motorcycling, and they convinced the AMA to change to superbikes. And you know, superbikes are great, but I mean, it just didn't have quite the excitement that the Formula One type bikes had. And Freddie Spencer won the first race in 1985 on superbikes, and Eddie Lawson later won on a Yamaha. And but it's a little bit of a change of tone, and some of the crowd came down maybe just slightly at first, but eventually various rule changes. They went through the 80s into the 90s, and they started kind of tweaking the formulas a lot, and you know, a lot of you probably have followed it, you know, kind of where it is now, and it's you know, it's still exciting to go, and it still has its attachment to that, but I think it's kind of, they've sort of brought it down to maybe kind of more of a club level kind of a race than an international race. And you know, the bikes are all kind of the same between the Suzuki's and Kawasaki's, and I think the formula isn't quite what it is, but the race continues to go on, and like we've seen with Daytona through the years, the beach, the speedway, to you know, different formulas and stuff. You know, maybe the day will come where they'll reinvent that a little bit, and it could well come back again. But it's been going a long time. I think they're only about with the break they took from World War II, they're about 1 or 2 years shy of the 75th annual race is coming up at Daytona in a couple of years here. But from there, so. But that kind of brings us kind of current day. But anyways, that's kind of my story. And I think anybody have any questions or anything that I said along the way that confused anybody, or?
Actually, can we share some of these photos? Like, would you mind?
Oh yeah,
John,
he had some photos that are from a. That was from, I think, primarily, what did we decide, 1971? Yeah, that's right, 1971. That was the year when I rode for. I rode for the BSA factory. This is
He's a pretty good-looking guy.
There was a photographer who has since passed away, and his son had taken over. He got his photographic collection, but I don't know if you can see this very well. But this is in 1971 when I raced for BSA, and that's myself. And this is Mike Halewood, very legendary Grand Prix rider, and Dick Mann and David Aldana, who both of them were very famous in on Any Sunday. If you saw that, but that was the BSA team. Actually, Jim Rice was one other rider that was over there, and he was a rider on Any Sunday that ended up hitting the wall at the near the end of the movie. But this is Paul Smart and Mike Halewood. Again, back to Dick Mann and Mike Halewood. And I think he was a very cool guy. I had, if you follow, you know, Grand Prix racing, you're familiar. You know, he raced for MV Augusta's first factory, won Isle of Man. I think he won 13 times, I think, at the Isle of Man, something like that. And first he was on the MV Augusta factory. Later was on the Honda, the years of the Honda 4s, the 500s, and the 350s. And then, I don't know if it's more famous, but had the legendary ride. He had retired after 71. Actually, this very racer, I don't think he raced very many more times. But then in 1978, they convinced him to go ride a Ducati at the Isle of Man, and came back very legendary when he won the senior race at the Isle of Man. Just various different shots that this fellow had taken, kind of in the infield. They used to have a big opening ceremony there, and that's what a lot of these shots and stuff are here, right before the start of the Daytona 200. They had a big lineup of our bikes and all of that. And that's me and my mechanic in 1971. His name was Mac Kambayashi. He had he was first a Yamaha factory mechanic. It's him here, and then BSA hired him the year I was on the team, and then later he had a speed shop over in Brea. I think he was also maybe a Kawasaki dealer over there, but still lives in the area. This is Dick Mann. Early shot of Kenny Roberts. This is his year where he wasn't even in the expert division just yet, just getting started in road racing. Was really doing much better in dirt tracking at the time. But different shots of some of the things in the pits, kind of open air pits, old Harley Davidson team bikes. They kind of got really kind of left out of the thing once the Suzukis and Kawasaki's, everybody got things figured out. This is one of the big Suzuki 750s. It's just a big old giant bike. I rode one again in '73, I mentioned, and they didn't handle very well, but they were just a bunch of horsepower is what they amounted to. But it's kind of the pits in Daytona in those years. A lot of open garages, and this big riders meeting we used to have out on the lawn in the before the start there. This is a fellow, Rusty Bradley, in 1964. Actually, was killed in the first turn of the race, right in front of me. We came off did that 2.5 miles I mentioned on the first lap, and when the first lap into the infield, he ran into a rider that was right in front of him, and he high-sided. Unfortunately, he was killed in that crash too. So it's a real nice guy. This looks like tech inspection, going through kind of a tech inspection line. This is a rider, Cal Rayborn, who actually was much more famous for riding Harley Davidsons. But in I mentioned earlier, the 250cc race that we all would kind of run. And so this was a race. He was on a 250 Yamaha in the 250 race that year. He was later killed in New Zealand in a race. This is the rider here. This number 97. This was the rider that was in the year I won the race of Ray Hempstead, rider who ended up getting second in 1972 race. Just kind of things on the line at the start of the race. But, here's somebody checking tires. It's Gene Romero, who is the Grand National Champion. This is one of the shots that kind of shows. I think this is 70. No, this actually might be 72 because the Suzuki in '71 were all 500s, I think. So this actually might be, and this is bounded up with the Goodyears. So this is kind of part of that whole issue. That's probably why they're taking the picture of that. Trying to get a handle on what was going on with tires. And this is one of the factory Kawasaki's that's in for a pit stop. Again, one of those big quick change side fills that he had, and that was the what?
That's Ralph White.
That's Ralph White.
No gloves.
He was a Kawasaki.
Got no gloves on. Running the Daytona.
Yeah. He's a former Daytona winner. Yeah. That's Talladega thing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Talladega.
So, another shot here of Mike Halewood, number 20, Kel Carruthers, 73, kind of mentored Kenny Roberts those years. There's the victory lane in 1971 with myself, Dick Mann, and Gene Romero. So Dick won the race. Gene Romero was second, and I was third. That was my first time in the 200. There's Kenny Roberts in the junior race. I think it was that second or something. I think. But yeah, that was neat that you brought those. But that was from there. So, but I do have some stuff I can sign for you guys. Or again, anybody have any questions or comments or anything else you'd like to know that I didn't tell? I hope I didn't go too long, but
so the dealers were totally behind the racers.
Dealers were really involved in that, and Yamaha was the best. There wasn't really, that I remember, too many dealers that had lots to do with, Hondas, Suzuki's, and Kawasaki's. It was Yamaha was the one that really had a neat program because in '71, '72, actually '71, they really didn't have much of a factory program, but they would have dealers. This thing that I wrote for, Mel Dennison, was the dealer in Bakersfield. There was a K&N Motorcycles out in Riverside. There was Boston Cycles. There was about 6 or so shops that they really got behind, and so the dealer then delivered the bike. But Yamaha just had they had a whole tech thing. They'd show them how to take the production Yamaha, different pipes, different things you do, how to get the most power out of it, type of thing. Right. And Yamaha supported it. They would be there with a parts office that you could actually go and actually buy parts if you broke something in Daytona. Nobody else had that. Suzuki didn't have anybody else. If they crashed and really bent up their bike or they seized and blew a motor, whatever. If you didn't bring parts, you were kind of out. Where Yamaha was there, they had a full parts supply. The technical guys were getting them going, and the way it worked out in 1972 Daytona 200, I won on the Mel Dennison, a dealer from Bakersfield, won the race. Ray Hempstead, their shop was called Barney's in St. Petersburg, I think, there, and Dave Smith rode for Don Vesco in San Diego. So Yamaha, basically, Yamaha dealer bikes were 1, 2, 3 in the Daytona 200 against all the factories and all that. But Yamaha did they did a bang up job with that. So.
In those fields that were, like over 100 racers, even 80, how many of them were privateers?
Well, there's actually more factories than you would think. I mean, compared to where things are nowadays, there were. See, again, Yamaha had that approach. Now, in the '71, Yamaha didn't really have. They had one rider, Kel Carruthers, who was kind of factory supported. But in '72, I think there was Kel, Kenny, maybe 1 or 2 other riders were actually on the yellow and black factory bikes, and the way it turned out, none of them finished, and so it was the privateer bikes on Yamahas that ended up winning the race. But in those years, actually, well, like the year before when I was with BSA, there was a Daytona. There were 5 factory BSAs, 5 factory Triumphs. There was about 4 John Player Nortons. There were about 3 factory Suzukis, 3 factory Kawasaki's. We're leaving out a couple Hondas and everything like that. So there was probably 25 bikes, so almost a third of the field, really. I mean, if there was about 75 or 80 bikes that started the race, about actually a third of them were factory supported bikes, and then the rest were privateers from there. When you look at things now, I mean, you have Josh Hayes and Josh Heron, a couple Yamaha factory riders, and that's about it. Now we have about 2 or 3, 4, maybe 4. I think Yamaha has 4 factory riders in the 2 different classes, and that's pretty much it. And from there, so it's really changed a lot. From that
and the field today is what, like 20-some, isn't it?
Well, yeah, this year was really off. This year, I don't think there was 36 bikes were in the 200 this year. So it's come down a long way, but it's just kind of unfortunate. I mean, I think that everybody still has the hope that it'll kind of come back again. I think one thing that Kenny Roberts, who's I've known through a lot of the years, and he's seen racing from being a little scrambles rider to all the way to the very top of the world and world championships, all the things, and he doesn't really like to talk and say a lot of things, but one of the things that he said that always sticks with me and is really brilliant. He says, people will pay to see things that are hard to do. When when it comes down to it, which is if you think about what kind of things would you pay to go see, here, and unfortunately the battle that maybe the sport has kind of lost is, I think, between the AMA, the manufacturers kind of have to make the racing kind of come together with providing some bikes and things they do, and of course the manufacturers want to see their bikes on the track, and then it came down to, well, they want to see bikes like the kind of things that they sell, and so the whole good and evil out of the whole thing was they got what they asked for. They developed a rule package that put bikes on the track that look just like the ones that you can ride, but in reality, you might have a faster bike. You could have a faster bike sitting at the curb out here than maybe they would actually be running on the track. And so in the end, are you going to really pay to go just sit and watch these guys ride that, or maybe we all just go riding today, and have a better time out in the back hills, But it's kind of like, but if you look at, I think this morning they said something like 95,000 people, whatever it was, in Saxon Ring watching the MotoGP, because everybody realizes the MotoGP bike isn't something for everybody that everybody can do, and that's exciting. That's why Laguna, everybody wants to go up when Laguna comes, to see the thing, because they're hard to do, they're hard to ride, they're very dangerous, you can get hurt real bad, and unfortunately that's what the kind of thing is what people, but great racing, great drama, and all that is as well. But we realize that that's not for everybody. And so I think ultimately, there's hope that someday they'll see that that's what it's going to take to get the crowds back, to get the factories on the sport, and bring them back around again. As they really need to have things that are real trick, real hot, real fast, real hard to ride, and then the best riders will be adapted to that. But it's all. But yeah, it's been a wild time through the years, and it's had its ups and downs, and there's a lot of hope that there'll be some more ups ahead of us and stuff there. So.
Did you have any rivals? I mean, is there anybody that you like had?
It's really funny when I rode. I just kind of raced the racetrack. I every now and then there was a few races. In my year with BSA, we got to go over and race in the match races in England. and it was kind of neat. There were some guys that over there. There was real short courses and things. And I can remember kind of there were a couple guys that I really kind of wanted to beat, and doing a few things, stuff I'm in on a turn and trying to do some passes. And every now and then there was a few little passes and stuff along the way. But I got along. They're kind of all my friends, and we a lot of them we traveled together. We had vans and we'd caravan around the country, and because again we weren't running 10 times a year. I was probably riding 50 races a year, and we were in vans, and instead we had our dirt track bikes, and we'd do things, and stayed in a lot of the same places. And these were kind of they're all kind of my my buddies and stuff, and really for me I had my dad and people, I'd come out and get practice and get the stopwatch, and I would just try to get a line that was the best line I could get around the track, and just try to learn the course. And I always just kind of race the track, and every now and then, there seemed like there was always kind of time if somebody was where you wanted to be, you were either kind of you really were kind of going by somebody or they were going by you. Is kind of what it amounted to. I mean, there was a few tight spots again, like this thing with with Ray Hempstead, but it was like in the 200, we would kind of draft back and by, but it was kind of more. Kind of like a little chess match, rather than trying to, physically get by him, whatever. You just try to, if you could outbreak somebody and get by him, and hopefully you could hold that. You had a few pit signals, that sort of thing. But for the end, mostly once a little something might be out of the way for me, I was always just trying to run the racetrack as hard as I could, try to keep in mind, finishing the race and doing all these things, and from there. But I had, there was different people, and for me. Growing up again with my dad, and so I was around motorcycling so young and so early, and I even had an older brother who was racing as well, and so we were going to a lot of races. So it turned out that there's some of these guys, Dick Mann and Gary Nixon, and some of these guys were big stars when I was 10 years old, and so to them they were kind of my heroes at one point, and now all of a sudden I'm racing with these guys, and that was a little bit different. So I was kind of respectful with these guys, and wanted to kind of be. I didn't want to do dumb things, trying to show them I could beat them, and then take them down or do something like that. So I was kind of respectful for the guys that I rode against, and they were to me. But I didn't really have any, I wouldn't say, real rivalries. It was just race after race after race, and you hoped it all went well, and you moved on to the next race. So it all pretty good. So what else? Anything else you'd like to know? Well, I did bring some things. I'll be happy to assign to you guys, and if I'll let you see Jessica, if you want to get if you'd like to get a copy of the book. But basically, just without taking up the whole day, what the book is about is the whole history of the 200, and to put it together, I'm kind of a little bit of a statistician of the whole thing. The first thing I actually did is I had to go out and find magazines and programs and everything I could find that would give me the full field of who ran in the Daytona 200. And one thing you'll notice in the book is that there's a statistics section that starts in the back, and this is actually the part that I did before I did the front section. But basically, every rider that had ever ridden the Daytona 200, not the novice races or the amateur races, but in the actual 200, is listed in there. And so what I had to do to be able to come up with this database is I had to find magazines or programs that actually showed every rider, all the way from the guy who won, all the way down to the rider who either just barely got off the line or went one lap and he was out. And fortunately, I found the places where it had run them, because I wanted to find out how many laps did they go, also what place did they get, and all that. And so from that I created a database, and so I continue that today. So send the list down to the Daytona. If you guys ever see maybe on one of the websites or the things like in Road Racing World, we're going to talk about the guys who are setting the mileage record, the career miles at Daytona 200. That's actually my database that I send them that report, and I've updated that. But that was I had to create that. It was never, the AMA never kept it, and the Daytona had never kept the list of all of them collectively. So what I had done is created this database, and so the back section of that is every rider, and this is through 2003. So every rider who had ridden in the Daytona 200 from 1937 to 2003 is listed in there. What place he got, how many laps he went, and and then how many miles overall he's ridden in his life. So the back section is all the statistics about all that, and the front section is the race from 1937 to 2003. But so it was fun to put together. We did one edition. I might have mentioned earlier, the paper edition that came out in 1990, and then in 2003 we updated it yet again, so to bring it to current with all that. So. Don't know just yet when the third edition will come out, although we are going to continue to keep the statistics updated, and I think we might actually, I've talked to the guys at Daytona, I might actually produce just the statistics section, update that this next year or two, so they kind of know what's going on with all that. But it's been it was a great event. It's a great part of our life. So it was it's kind of a love of the life of the work that goes into putting it together. So.
Thank you.
If you would like a print, I'd be happy to sign one to you, and I'll just put my name on it, or I can put your name on it as well. Sure. You like one?
Yeah. Blake.
Blake.
Yeah.
The first one in 1990, and it was all paperback edition that came out, and then this one here was 2003.
So we're still riding. Do you ride?
Yeah. Oh yeah. In fact, next year I've been what my current project is the we're retracing the route that Cannonball Baker did from when he rode from San Diego to New York in 1914, 11 and a half days. And next year we're going to do a centennial ride across the country for that. So I don't do any kind of racing or anything, but I just a little bit of the Polaris Razor. I could take out the desert on the 4-wheel stuff and everything. But I have KTM actually supplied a 990 adventure bike that we're using to retrace this route.
Oh, great.
Called the Cannonball Project.
Yeah, okay. Is that on a website?
Yeah, you can look at it says cannonballproject.com.
Okay, great.
You probably just Google my name or put Cannonball and it'll pop up.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay.
It's all at two ends.
KTM.
Nice to meet you.
Sure.
That was it.
Boston
Right. You guys do another thing. Yeah, I'm working on
Super generous.
not bad. Good for Italia.
No.
Oh, just the corporate back. Where?
I think those small. Oh, is it? It's not the corporate headquarters. Corporate headquarters in New York.
Maybe one more.
John?
Yes. She works kind of like a dental office.
That's a great idea.
She kind of got out of the industry.
Thank you so much. Barbara friend named Bill.
Bill?
He's about 80 and he still rides.
She still has her SB. I've done some suspension upgrades to it, so it feels better.
Sure.
So yeah, she has that. And
This guy, old Tom in Oregon. 2 months ago,
Yeah.
They never look at helmets, but like
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, of course.
they're all over that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's not the same.
Good neighborhood.
Not much.
Yeah. Well, my office is like 4 doors down.
Oh, is that where it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
It's not like a I don't know. Just back in.
Yeah, in fact, I looked for a couple pieces. She's got her stuff.
No, she's so much stuff for me.
Really? Yeah.
I mean, it's like,
Like an hour.
everybody ends up getting a closet full of
Yeah.
stuff, you know.
Well, I just, same thing I did. I brought a little mattress. Like you said, you just get stuff after a while. You don't really have it.
So the thing I never asked you is, okay, that was your racing support.
No, without
Don't bend it. I know you worked for, I'll give you a shot.
Good luck.
Yeah.
That's when I first met you.
You know, I went from, I worked at one time for Super Seer goggles, remember them back in the 70s? And I got a job with them, and I was actually I'd actually applied once to go to work for the Bell Helmets guys, and they didn't have this guy, Don LaRue. Do you ever know him? Anyway, and Bell was having Super Seer make them a goggle with a little Bell logo on it. And one time Don said, we don't have a spot for you here at Bell. He said, but you know what? He says, not long ago, this Bob Smith, he said, we're looking for somebody. And I was working in shops at that point. My folks had one and another one. And so, anyway, I got this job with Super Seer guys, but they didn't great guys. They were up in Colorado, so we're up there. And then actually, Everett Brashear one day was down seeing Steve Lewis at the old Dealer News office at Hester's. and they had just lost somebody selling ads or whatever and everything. And I think I told Everett, because at one time he was out there in Colorado with me. I said, if I could get back down to Southern California, I'd like to do that, whatever. And so I got a call from Steve Lewis, and he said, yeah, we got a spot if you'd like to give it a shot. So I went to work just selling ads. 78, 79, you were at Lockhart then, right? So we were probably starting to do business and stuff then. And then, and I did that for a couple of years, and then I went to work at Bell. Finally, the thing did finally open up there. They hired me, and I went to work at Bell for about 5 years. And then that was just that. Bell, they got those new owners, and it started getting kind of weird and different stuff. And that's when Hester sold.
Was that just let that stuff go?
Way before that. Way before. And so, and so Bell was, but it led to that. Yeah, it led to that. That's when that Terry Lee and those guys were just getting involved in the thing.
Yeah.
I was getting really uncomfortable where Bell was really going to go with it. In fact, then they were talking about moving it to Illinois, to a better place.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, you know, I'm from Southern California. We just got finally through
Yeah, I came from Illinois. We don't want to move.
Yeah, exactly. And so I didn't want to move to Illinois and everything, and it was kind of good. Kind of weird anyway. And then I got a call from somebody at Hester's place that said they sold a company to the HBJ, and then they actually fired Dick Hamer.
I remember Dick.
They lost his job, and they had a thing there.
I think he's selling real estate.
Yeah, I think in the area. Yeah. Anyway, but they just
God, I
wanted
couldn't even think about that.
They fired him. Followed all the money, said, you know,
that's like,
they hired
yeah.
So I kind of got started, you know, more on the sales end, but I was starting to write a little bit there. And then after about 5 years, I was actually published. When I came back, I was the publisher. And if it wasn't, I got Dick's job.
Wow.
And but I started writing it. I got the column and doing a few things. But after about 5 years, you know, things then moved a little bit. You know, just the pressures and things. You know, they were financially.
At some point, you started your own thing.
Yeah, in 1990, we just went on our own.
Yeah,
you know, whatever
yeah,
we had
true.
to
I mean, you gotta kind of give it to them for that.
So yeah, so we've been in business
Like what you know, Mike, Kiwi Mike.
Yeah. Well, he's smart. He's a smart business. He actually came down.
Oh, yeah?
There was a meeting
Yeah.
with him,
Well, back in it was 82. It was like 1980, I think it was. Janet Lockhart was my assistant. And
He is a smart
I
guy.
introduced her to Winner at the Anaheim show one year. I mean, he had a booth with my products at it, my products. Yeah, and then 2 weeks they got together. They were going to get married, and 2 weeks before the wedding, he got killed. And he was on job. So Lockheed, Janet's dad, hired him and made him head of consumer products division, which meant he was going to be my boss, and Janet was So I interviewed a number of places at the time. I wasn't going anywhere, but I was doing freelance. You know, I had Barnett and I don't think I had Performance Machine at the time, but I had Barnett and a couple other companies. There were 2 weeks worth of freelance stuff.
They do, but
go
they
for it. You
from
know. In retrospect, I don't know.
it's really hard to go against this training and the precedent and all
In
that.
fact, I was going to go up to Laguna Seca, you know, for the races, and
Yeah.
I had to go to Colorado.
And none of us
Bad
would go
timing.
like,
Oh, that's in the show?
Yeah, it's next weekend.
Yeah, we've been at it a lot of years, Robert.
Yes. You going to go up to Laguna?
No, I'm going to go to Indy this year instead. I kind of wanted to do one of the
years
other,
of
and it wouldn't
floating
work
The
out.
only problem with Indy is it might rain, you know?
Anybody and everybody could
The
make
race,
Indian
the
something.
race in the rain. Listen to hurricane.
They made
Yeah,
all kinds of
exactly. I was
stuff.
there.
That was my birthday.
Yeah.
That's the biggest crowd.
Yeah.
This is the last year, huh?
I met a guy who
So
was
far,
working on like
they're
This is the last year for me. They won't do it again.
yeah, it's looking like it.
It was interesting you talking about Jody Nicholas. You know, Jody worked at Lockhart for a while there.
Okay.
He was
had to
he
dumb
was
it down
there.
for big guy.
And then he starts talking about, oh, well, then Ducati makes I think Frank knows it. He rides all the time.
Yeah, Jody, I just saw him yesterday. I went to
I
that
take
little
notes,
town
notes enough,
motocross
my
thing
ears are
yesterday.
going to
And Jody
articulate
was
this.
up there, saw him up
That was a
there.
big
Oh,
deal,
wow.
huh?
That was fun, yeah, that was a nice day, yeah.
Yeah, he lives in the area somewhere.
Yeah.
He rides all the time.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
They have some people that help down.
Yeah, he had a lot of people.
Add more if you want.
That was pretty neat. It was a neat day. And of course, the highlight of the whole thing was that they'd flown Torsten Holm and Joel Romero. They were there.
Serious, huh?
Yeah, and then Roger DeCosta was there, but Roger's in the U.S. You know, with those other two, you don't see them ever. But they were there, and but there was, I don't know if there was 1,000 people. There might have been 1,000 people there. It was a big crowd.
They have some
This company
adjustability, but from what I've
took
been
over their whole
told from
parking lot. They just let people just
us,
bring a bike. It was all free. Everything, free admission. You want to bring a bike, you know, whatever.
But
So,
the way ours moves, you don't really notice it. Like
Brad
on
was there. In
ours,
fact,
you
I got a
don't
shot of
notice it
Brad and
unless you
Torsten
look down
and
the dash, you see those